This is Space Cat's Peace Turtles, the unofficial podcast for Fantasy Flight's Twilight Imperium.
Episode 64, the sure-to-be scrutinized, 100% definitely 2018 TI faction tier list.
Music by Ben Prunty, featuring Matt Martins and Hunter Donaldson.
So that was 2018. Was it a good one? Let's just, from the gate, I just want to know, was it a good one? It was a good one for Twilight Imperium.
Does the sound of my voice sound like it was a good
Yeah, okay,
one?
so Matt's voice is gone.
I'm a bullfrog today.
Can you say why?
I don't know why, because I'm sick.
I know why.
Why? Because I scream so much?
Yeah, because you scream so much, because you yell so loud when you play the games. Because this is actually your punishment for sitting out of the crazy game that people still haven't... People haven't gotten to see yet, but there was a crazy game for the Christmas Spectacular, which you heard about last week,
yep.
And you were not in it, and so I think this is what's God in Twilight Imperium? Dane's curse.
Dane's curse is punishing my voice. This is gonna be a weird episode today because I sound terrible, but we're gonna do
You
it
sound
anyways.
really bad.
I know.
You
so
sound
sorry.
like you're coming to us from a garbage can.
I'm Oscar the Grouch.
Is this going to be the last one for a while with us in the same room? We are in the same room.
We're in the same room.
We're
and this is
United
it.
Boys.
Yeah, this will be the last
We
one.
might get another one in the can before I
Maybe.
go.
If you want to record before you leave.
Maybe.
That's a discussion for off mic.
Right. So what how was 2018?
I thought 2018 was great.
for TI?
For TI, we went to Gen Con. Gen Con had a great tournament for TI.
Mm-hmm.
There were a bunch of other tournaments that we got to hear about around the country. There was a cool one in Seattle. I know New York has a really cool league. There's a league in Texas, like Austin. There are like lots of big groups of TI, and they're getting bigger. It seems like.
Yeah. And also our tournament is, so the next time you hear from us, our tournament will have begun.
Yes.
The first game will have been played, which is super exciting because what that means is that this has all been perfectly timed to where 2018 is over. Now we're beginning a new arc of the show.
Yep.
It's the tournament arc.
Arc is go.
Right. And that's going to be great. It's going to be really fun. I would expect every single episode of the show for the next 2 or 3 months to have at least some form of recap of the tournament games that were played. Remember, we will not be able to broadcast them for fear of cheating.
Right.
We might be able to broadcast some of them only after the fact.
We're going to try to put almost every single one of them online. If we can,
Right.
If we can make it happen, we will put all of them online. Our good friend Root is going to help us do that. He's going to help us commentate some games, and Root will be probably editing some video for us because I'm still not done with the Gen Con video. However, that is coming along as well, so I'll throw that up there.
Yeah, so
we're about
us
to
being
record
in
a commentary track. It's
Right.
like the last thing we do before Hunter leaves, and that's like kind of one of the last pieces of the puzzle for getting this thing done. So.
Right. So you guys will finally see a tournament video from so long ago, but once we get that to you, it'll be like, well, we've got way more tournament style material for you.
And Root's gonna do little mashups, maybe. I mean, we're gonna see how it goes. We're gonna kind of experiment, I think, in the prelims. But he's got ideas of him wanting to do little 5-minute just recaps or highlight reels of different funny things that happen in games. So there'll be a lot of content that we're putting out, and Root is helping us put out, and I'm very excited for that. And Hunter says 2 to 3 months. It could be through April. I don't even know. It really depends on how quickly we get all these games scheduled and how easy that is to do. It's going okay so far, but there's a lot that has to happen still.
Right.
So we will take it as we can.
Yeah, there's certainly going to be a lot of madness. I also just want to say, just to tease a little without being too specific, and I hope you don't get mad at me, but we already kind of know after the tournament arc is done, we know what is after that, and we have already kind of started work on that, and I'm already really excited about that.
I'm jazzed for what 2019 is going to mean.
2019 is going to be really crazy for us because I feel like 2018 was us figuring out, this show and what it is and what that means and finding all of you.
Right.
And now we're kind of just going to go buck wild.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys have
we got
noticed.
too comfortable,
Right.
and now we got to shake up the recipe a little bit.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, I would expect way more content in 2019 than you got in 2018.
Yeah,
for sure.
Probably, yeah. So that all being said, today, to try to keep things brief so that my throat doesn't explode,
Right.
we're gonna do a fun, dumb thing called the Sure to Be Scrutinized 100%, definitely 2018 Twilight Imperium faction tier list.
Now this is a list, a definitive list.
Definitive.
It's.
Can we say it one more time?
It's
It's
definitive.
definitive.
Definitely, me and Matt are doing it. That's the part that's for sure true, and it is definitely 2018. And these are definitely Twilight Imperium factions.
Yeah.
We need to get our theoretical tier list up because we want to. Should we go over that first? Do we want to go over kind of compare where we were at when the game came out?
Yeah.
The last time we did a tier list, which, by the way, the last time we did a tier list, we said we would probably never do one again because people get pretty upset about tier lists in general.
Right. And
but
TI just isn't a game where tier lists actually make sense because it's hard to weight these things. But we in episode 6 in 2017, we did a faction tier list that was basically us avoiding even actually doing a tier list. We did a categorization.
Right. The first, if we just want to kind of go over it real quick.
Yeah,
so the top tier was called objective focused, and our number one spot was Emirates of Hakan.
I don't know if we did these really even in order.
Oh, that's
time.
true.
I think we just kind of this is a group.
So here's the grouping of 4. The top 4 were Emirates of Hakan, University of Jolnar, L1Z1X, and Nalu. The next tier was called Powerful Abilities. Oh, God, this is already funny to me. Yeah. Federation of Soul was in that tier, not the top tier.
Can we reiterate as we go through this list? This is before we ever played the game.
We had never played.
So
we had never played, and we got
that's
so much.
That's why it was the theoretical tier list.
Right, and we got so much guff for this. So much guff.
Let's give ourselves some guff.
Yeah.
Continue.
So Powerful Abilities was Federation of Soul, Barony of Letnev, Mentak Coalition, and the Arborek. Wow, some bad calls in there. The next tier was called Questionable Strength, and that included
questionable strategies.
Oh, questionable strategies, yeah. Isarl Tribes was in that one. Sardak Nor, Extra Kingdom, Clan of Sar. Man. And then we had a special tier that was part of that tier, but also kind of its own tier because remember how stupid we were. This was called the Yin tier, and that just included Yin. Because remember that joke? The next tier was a little bit weird. It only had two factions in it, and it was called Lack of Versatility, and that included the Winnu and Embers and Muat. Kind of still stand by that. The last tier, the bottom tier, which actually is kind of confusing because it doesn't sound like it's really the bottom tier at all, but it was called Situational and included Ghost of Creus and Necrovirus. So this year, we're going to do something a little bit different. I think I would expect to hear us do this every year.
Sure.
Because as the meta changes, the faction tiers change.
Sure.
And I
hopefully, next year or maybe not next year, but the year after that, we might have new factions. So we'll have to just rewrite everything.
Right,
the book's
right.
going to have to get rewritten.
Right. And so the thing about this one that you should keep in mind is that this is 100% definite.
Yeah.
And me and Matt wrote our own competing ones that we're going to reveal to each other. I'm going to be hearing it for the first time from Matt. Matt's going to be hearing it from the first time from me. And what else do I want to say? Oh, so this was, I actually didn't even tell you this, but the idea of this was that this was the tier list for 2018. So if you want to debate this, that's fine, but 2018 is over.
This is done. You don't get to argue.
Yeah, like this tier list is in the past. So if you were to say like, oh, that's not right, I'm like, yeah, it isn't right. It's 2019.
Yeah.
So that's how we're getting out of it. It's like as we're leaving the door, we're saying 100%
This is the tier
definitely.
list. I got to go.
It was for sure this, though. This is what it was
definitely.
for 2018.
100% definitely.
Yeah. And who knows, 2019 will bring whole new things,
Sure.
and I suspect on day one I'll feel differently about this, especially once I get all your feedback. And then I'll definitely be like, well, the 2019 tier list is already shaping up, I see. All right, do we want to start at the bottom? We have one stupid gimmick that we've thrown in. So obviously there are 17 factions, which is good for like 4 different tiers of 4, and then one tier that has 1, which is how we decided to structure it. And so it's like what you could do is have the top tier be a
Sure.
tier by itself,
What
and
is
you
the
call that
best
shot.
faction?
Yeah, absolute
Or-
best. Or you could do an F tier and it'd be absolute worst.
No.
But what would be the most difficult one to do? That's right, a B tier with only one faction. So for both of our tier lists, we are going to try and call the absolute middle of the road faction that is just medium,
Yep.
just
They're just there.
not rare, not well done, right in the middle, just kind of a juicy beef.
Man, I've got a juicy beef. Let me tell you.
Do we want to start at the bottom or the top? We want to start at the bottom, right?
I don't know if it matters. Mine is a little bit easier to explain top down, but I will go bottom. I can make it work bottom.
Let's go bottom up.
Bottom
I
up.
think so. Bottom up.
D tier.
D tier.
And
Fourth.
this one we did decide to do in order. So this is from 17 to 1. There just happen to be tiers arbitrarily.
Yeah. So the tier D in the 17th slot.
Yes.
For me, for Hunter Donaldson. I mean, I think you know.
Yeah.
You should know. With the storyline
Yeah.
has not changed. Embers of Muat with a bullet point. I don't even care that we made a map for the prelims of the tournament that specifically is better for Muat.
Right. You still hate them.
I still
Well, that's
hate
because
them.
the tournament hasn't happened yet.
Right.
So Muad isn't good yet.
In 2019.
In 2019,
it will
Muad
all
will be
change.
good.
But now I have to kick them while they're down, right? Kick all the eggs out of their basket and break all of them.
Yeah.
Muad.
So
With a bullet.
Explain that and give me, because my list has a bit of a theme that we'll be working
Right.
our way through.
Mine is less cohesive probably, but because it's based more on feeling and emotion, because I'm just more emotional.
Uh-huh.
I mean, 17 Muat writing the Muat first round strategy guide nearly killed me. And also it's the only faction that I wrote a strategy guide for that I never won a game as, which,
Right.
that's kind of a bummer. And it makes you feel like maybe your advice isn't even that good,
Yeah.
which I think it's fine. I think it's fine to say that maybe that episode isn't that good and that you don't need to take it seriously because it was a lot of pain, But yeah, I never won as Muat, even though I played,
4 or 5?
no, more than that.
Oh, yeah.
It's because I kept pushing myself. I kept saying like, well, I didn't win that time, but I'll try something else. And I just kept experimenting and it just never happened. I mean, I'm going to say 7 games because I remember I did 4 and I was like, 4 should have been enough, but I haven't done it. And then I remember I just kept making excuses like, no, I'll just play one more.
Right.
And then there was about 7 games. 7 games to play one faction in a row and not being able to win. And every single time I was close. So like, imagine like basically my experience with Muat was I was having a good game for Muat and just not 7
just not
points,
enough.
8
Right.
points, 9 points every single time.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was not fun.
Mine's Winu because it's obvious because Winu is Winu and
Yeah,
they're
but
trash,
can
too.
I go ahead and
You sure
dispute
can,
you
but-
because you won that stream as winner, so you at
Yeah,
least
but that
won a game.
stream had a really ridiculous last round shenanigan because of the audience. That stream was an audience agenda stream.
Oh, was it that one?
Yeah, because that's the one where our Necro player John had his action card hand taken away.
Oh yeah,
I think it was that game. If it wasn't that game, it was the game before where
he got publicly executed.
something. I don't know.
Yeah.
There was just a lot of shenanigans and yeah, I mean it was kind of an arbitrary Winu win.
Right.
Now, Winu in 4-player and 3-player is a whole different thing, but if I'm talking 6-player games, a 3-resource home system with 1 carrier and 2 infantry and no game plan except for you have to stretch yourself thin to take Mechatol and then get gutted. It's just bad.
Yeah, it's upsetting.
The theme, I hinted at this, the theme of my tier list ended up being, I wrote everything out and then realized this was how I feel about factions. The more you need the meta to shift in your favor, the worse the faction. Like the more you just lean on, I need them to give me a break to be able to do anything. And vice versa, as we get into the upper ones, it'll be the more that you just shift the meta by existing.
Right.
By being on the board, but everyone has to deal with you now.
I agree.
That is kind of how mine is structured. So Winu, I think, needs the most from the table to be able to achieve anything.
I feel like mine doesn't quite obey that, but it kind of has the theme of mine, I would say, has to just do with certainty versus uncertainty.
Yeah.
And I would say for my D tier, basically, the certainty in it is that you're going to have a rough go of it.
Right.
That's
yeah.
the whole.
It is certain. They
It's
meet
certainly
in the
difficult.
middle. You have certainly going to do well and certainly going to do bad.
Okay.
So what's your second? What's
my
number
16? And actually, it's good that I'm bringing this up now because my 16 is Winu.
Right, and my 16
I'll
is
just use
Muat.
yeah. Okay, so I'll just use all of the logic you just used for
Right.
Winu. I'll just sub that in. And but what? So let's hear you talk a little bit about Muat though, because I just went personal on Muat.
Sure. Well, it's because of this. It's the same. Muat relies on having a friend help them out. Any faction that's like, I need a buddy, so to even survive, that's a problem for the faction, right? There are plenty of factions where I was like, if I get a buddy, I'm gonna do great. Muat doesn't do great if they have one person on their side. Muat gets to status quo if they have someone helping them out.
Right.
And that's the only thing that saves them in my book.
You know what's something interesting I've noticed about the difference between Winu and Muat is that we dunk on both of those factions plenty, and it feels like there is an outspoken like kind of sleeper cell, splinter cell, like group in our base of listeners that are very pro Muat, and they're trying to push their agenda.
Well, because here's the thing, and this is probably why Winu is also at the bottom of mine, is at least Muat is cool.
Right, Muat is cool.
At least you get a War Sun.
It is
Winu,
cool.
You get nothing.
Yeah, see,
Winu, you have nothing.
That's
you
what
have
I was going to point out.
Strategy.
There is not, as far as I can tell, and I'm sure somebody will pipe up now, and I'm glad that I've sparked your rebellion or whatever, but I have not noticed that much of a big Winu, like, insurgency, a group of people that are just like, no, Winu.
I think there are people that dig Winu, but they're all people that play 4-player games regularly.
Well, sure, and that's completely different.
Right.
Oh, yeah, did I mention this is a 6-player faction to your list? Because 4-player, right?
Hunter
I'm sorry.
Hunter got grief for being elitist about 4-player.
I did, and actually, I got kind of hurt by it. Like, I gotta be honest, it was one of those erratas that, like, actually did kind of hurt my heart a little bit. Because I didn't mean to. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
Well, yeah, let's say that real quick because we're on the topic. It's not that we don't think you should never play 4-player games. It's just like, oh man, if you can get a 6-player game together, though, it is.
Well, and also
so much better to
think about where we're coming from a little bit, because I would say we are very heavily invested in 6-player, and that we have spent so much time thinking about 6-player. Maybe we shouldn't have even done a 4-player episode. We should have just been like, well, we've only dabbled in that, so but we did. Okay, well, all right. We also in that episode were like, we don't really play a lot of 4-player. I didn't play it at all. So
this is a weird tangent.
Yeah,
let's do number 15.
Yeah, number 15. Actually, it's your turn.
This is where I think things get controversial, but I'm curious where you're going to stand.
Mm-hmm.
I put the Arborek as number 15. I put him in the dumpster.
You meanie.
Yeah, I think that their start is so bad. And again, this leans on they need help. They need round one. They need round one to go perfect for them.
That's true.
So I had number 15 and number 14, which we'll get to, in kind of, you know, they were both competing for who was going to be worse. And in my mind, Arborek is worse just because that first round is no laughing matter. I mean, you really, yes, you can still snowball later and have a great end game, but there's just, you can get crushed. And we see it so often too, especially in the tabletop simulator community where they're like really ruthless about eliminating players. It's pretty normal to just gut an Arborek right away. Right. Because it's so easy to do it. So you might as well.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to give away where Arborek is placed on my tier list, but I don't disagree with you by a lot. I disagree with you by a little.
Right.
Because I just feel like if you can get, like, their rough start can sometimes amount to just the strategy card pick. If they get the right strategy card, it's not going to be the worst game for them. No. But it is a bummer that so much is dependent on that.
Right.
And they don't have a lot to bargain with is the other problem.
Yeah.
They have things to bargain with that are so detrimental to them, like Stymie. I don't know. I feel like I would like another go on Arborek in general.
Yeah.
Just because and you know what? I'm willing to say that this is probably just like a soft spot I have in my heart for Arborek because I just love the ability. I just love it.
Well, you know what? I've seen you do better with Arborek than I see most people do as Arborek. So I don't know if I don't pay attention to you enough in the first round, but maybe I don't know if it's you just getting the meta right in the first round, or if it's just that, I don't know, maybe more often I see newer players trying Arborek and like you just can't afford to burn that first round.
I mean, I think if you're picking second to last or last as Arborek first round, I mean, that might be enough for it to just not work out for you.
Yeah.
Because then you're having a slow second round.
Right.
And that's really rough.
What's your number 15?
My number 15 is Sardak Nor.
I feel like those are the three routinely bottom three.
Right.
Sardak.
With Sardak being clearly the best, I feel like.
Right, and that's why I wanted to make a statement, because I really do think Arborek has some serious issues. And for me, so I'll reveal while you're talking about Sardak, I want to reveal that my next one, my number 14 is Sardak. So I put Sardak just above Arborek.
Mm-hmm.
And to go on my point before Hunter talks about his pick for Sardak, I just want to say, for Sardak, the problem is the tech thing, right? And you start behind. But if tech objectives don't come out, that doesn't end up amounting to anything extreme.
I agree.
And that's why I think that they have a great start, and if those objectives aren't a big deal, then they're going to have an okay game. You can even get away with there being one stage 1 tech objective.
Mm-hmm.
Even both the stage 1s. Now, if a stage 2 tech objective comes out, things can get a little bit scarier. But in general, I don't think it's that hard to deal with the tech objectives as Sardak, compared to that first round as Arborek.
Also, I still think that and I wish more players felt the same way. I still think their racial promissory, Teklar Legion, whatever thingy, so good. Yeah, I love it so much. And I just wish that people were more down to buy it, because I feel like, I feel like it's something that if other players saw the usefulness in it, first of all, it would help Sardak start by a lot, because they have a bargaining chip. They have something that encourages you to. It's not even necessarily that people are going to buy it off of you early game, but the idea would be, hey, I'm a 3 commodity race. I realize I'm not in the running. You trade with me. You also get this promissory note. Do it. And I think the money.
Like the easiest example of it is, I feel like it's worth a research agreement from Jolnar.
I think so too.
Give them a +1 in a ground combat where Jolnar really needs it.
Yeah,
they really need to be brought up to equal footing with somebody else. Give them that +1, and you can get a tech. Guess what? Now you're both on level playing field for like a round.
Right. Yeah, and then we won't see Jolnar lose, even though they outnumbered the invasion.
Right.
Yeah, I think that is very true. I think Sardak is, of all the factions we've talked about thus far, I feel the same way about Arborek, but less so. I actually feel like Sardak has a chance to where in 2019, I think we could see Sardak bump up a little bit. Because I think if the meta starts, like what we just talked about right now, that's kind of a meta thing.
Yeah.
That's basically the table doesn't see the value in it, but there have been so many games I have played where the problem is I need to do an invasion, and I don't have enough ground forces to get there. And if I just had one little bump, just a little boost, it would mean everything. And I think there's a lot of factions in particular where that's always going to be an issue. There are so many factions that aren't really that, like, I'm thinking about Barony. Jolnar is definitely the easiest example, but there are lots of factions that aren't really inclined towards infantry, but you always need them. Like, every faction has to have them, even if, like, Barony doesn't really care, they're going to need it. So yeah, I think that one could shift a little bit.
Can I make a weird prediction?
Yeah.
Whenever we see some expansion, so the TI3 expansions all geared more towards more combat.
Mm-hmm.
TI3 base game was like almost no reason to attack anyone ever, and each expansion kind of upped the ante on like what objectives are going to be
more hostile, more
and
aggressive.
TI4 started fairly hostile, but you still see some people even argue that it's pretty timid. I think if an expansion comes out, if at the very least it has more objectives in it, Sardak is going to be the most improved faction.
By that,
expansion.
I think that's so
I think
true.
Sardak Nor will see the biggest jump in tier lists with an expansion.
It doesn't even matter really what the new objectives would be. It's just the fact that there are more of them, and so therefore tech is less likely to come out in that first.
That helps Sardak a lot.
I think that's a really good point. I think that's a huge deal. All right, so let's get to
what's your number 14? Because I revealed mine as Sardak.
Yeah,
so what's your
mine? This one is the one that pains me the most, but I am ready to admit it. But I fought it for a long time. It's the Extra for me, and I love them. The problem is that they're one of my favorite factions.
Right,
but
they never
you made an argument that I resisted for so long, and then eventually was like, I have to cave. Which was that if the objectives do not line up for Arborek or for Extra, they don't have any way to like go get stuff.
Right. They have
like
no tools in their arsenal that allow them to go get stuff.
Right. All of their tools are defensive, which is great if they already have everything they need, and if they don't. And the fact is too, you have so specifically been trying for a Mechatol controlled Extra thing. And I've seen you try to pull it off so many times and it has not worked. I've never even tried to do that. I have just fallen into that because that's the way that the game worked out. But if you can't set up your flagship right next to Mechatol early enough to grab or to basically contest it, which it just doesn't seem like has been working out really very often at all. No. And it feels like they kind of have a really good thing they can do, but in the end, it's just kind of like, so what?
And the big thing is, if you decide to block Mechatol with your flagship, it means your flagship isn't protecting your home system. And that's what, in the main game where I was really going for it, that's what happened to me, is I got Muat jumping on my home system. So the problem with them is, you have to do too many things at once just to get the objectives, whereas other factions just like, I have fast ships and I have stuff that gets everywhere and like I can just do it. Extra, you have to put so much concerted effort into getting the objective scored.
Right.
It's so hard to deal with. And don't add to that, their defensive bonuses almost all cost a strategy counter.
Yeah.
So what, you're just swimming in command counters? That's crazy. Like they kind of need to cost a command counter, but they tacked so many things on at once to where it's like, there's no way, like, to use all of your abilities, you would need like 4 command counters in strategy and to be able to still do any secondaries at all.
I think there needs to be a drastic rethink of Extra. I think what needs to happen, because the problem has a lot to do with their tech path, I think.
Yeah.
Their tech path doesn't have any room for them to strike out and do things.
It's really hard to go blue, is what I found out. I really wanted to do blue as extra, and even that was kind of...
Yeah, why really can't blue-green work?
That's why I'm starting to lean towards forget nullification field exists. It is a great ability, but yellow isn't doing enough for you, and I would rather get the blue tech so that I can actually go accomplish objectives. And like, I don't need nullification field to be defensive.
Right.
That's been my big theory.
Yeah.
Recently.
Yeah, but then at that point, it's like, what does Extra have going for them?
Right.
Because then you're basically saying, well, I'm not worried about PDS. Maybe it's just, I don't know, I mean, now we're just completely theory crafting. But I do feel like there is wiggle room with Extra. Just like we were talking about with Sardak, there is room for the attitude to change. And I bet there's somebody out there that already has an Extra style or strategy that works better than what we've been trying to do, which is essentially double down on what works with them, which is graviton laser systems, PDS, and the flagship. And it doesn't feel like that's been enough. One of those 3 components that we just talked about needs to essentially go away or be de-emphasized in their strategy, and it needs to be replaced with something like infantry,
something good,
or
something that just helps. Something that just helps and
fighters,
doesn't have like a crazy cost. Yeah,
blue tech.
I would love it if, as a part of their defense, you just brought that up. You said fighters, and I think that's brilliant for them. If it's really easy for them to, gum up the works, right?
Yeah.
Like if part of their defensive bonuses, that's all I needed in that one game where I got my home system taken. If I had just been able to send a fighter easily out somewhere, and again, in a normal situation, that cost me a command counter just as much as anything else. So if I had a way to just poop out fighters or whatever, I feel like that could be a huge thing that helps Extra.
But now, see, the problem is that they don't start with plasma scoring. So you need plasma scoring to get PDS too. So are we just not going to go there? Because that's 2 tech we already got to get, and then we have to get to fighters after that. That's so much. That's so much. That's too much tech. So Extra, very regrettably did not want to put them there.
So that was D tier. Mine was Sardak, Arborek, Muat, Winnu.
Mine was Muat, Winnu, Sardak, Extra.
Pretty similar. And it's funny because I think they're going to conjoin a little bit when we get to this new C tier.
Mm-hmm.
Bottom of my C tier is Extra.
Oh, perfect.
For the same all the
reasons. Same logic.
I just put them a little bit above Sardak, and if anything, I almost put Sardak above Extra, to be honest. But
yeah,
I couldn't bring myself to do it.
Yeah. So my C tier, bottom of my C tier, which I think I'm wrong with this, but this is just my personal attitudes, is Ghost of Creus. I think I do feel like they're probably better than I'm giving them credit for, but my personal experience has been that Ghost for me over the year was the most variance I've seen in one faction as far as their ability. I have seen Ghost games, so many Ghost games where the Ghost player went right into the toilet. I have seen Ghost games where they ran away with it. And I've seen Ghost games where they held out and managed to pull it off. I just feel like I've seen every single type of Ghost game so many times. And also, it's a very popular faction. So, like, it gets picked a lot. People really like Ghosts.
Especially by new players. And that's like the major problem with Ghosts, is like they get picked by players that aren't prepared to do well with them.
I finally played them for the first time and loved it. Like, really, really loved it. And it was enough to where I almost wanted to push them up a lot further than this, but I went with my gut and my kind of how my feelings have been. I feel like Ghosts are going to go up for me personally a lot in 2019, but this is where I have them right now.
My number 12 in C tier, since we already talked about extra, my number 12 is Ghosts. Right. And this one is especially influenced by what I was saying earlier, which is the Ghosts need to get the meta on their side. It's the only way they'll succeed. They can do that, and they have some okay tools to do that. But it is required as a good Ghost player to be able to somehow get the meta to work for you. Yeah. You do not inherently have the meta working for you. And that's their problem.
And I just feel like there's too many factions that... like Ghost is always about, like, striking in, taking a nifty control objective, which in the stream I was able to do. But if you look at how my game goes, which it does go very well, it's a pretty typical game went well for me type of thing. On one side, my neighbor was Arborek, and that is the player that I was able to take things from. And that's not really a surprise. When you say it that way, it's like, well... Yeah, it's Arborek. They have a slow start, so I got to take stuff from them.
I've seen that exact situation more than any other specific situation of Ghosts messing up an Arborek.
Right.
That's just like almost, if you're neighbor with an Arborek as Ghost, that's almost what you're just required to do.
Right. And
the tools that you have against the tools that they have.
I just feel like overall Ghosts are a little bit flimsy, being that I think if someone had really turned on me earlier on in that game, I think my game would have gone to poo-poo really bad. Because people really love Dimensional Slicer. Is it Splicer or Splicer?
Actually, I forget because you've said it wrong so many times in my ears.
Yeah,
I forget which one.
Whichever it is, the dimensional one where you get a free hit to assign in a wormhole. I think people get a little more excited about that than it is great. I don't know. I don't think it's that. I don't think it's really really
Splicer.
Good. It's Splicer.
And I think it's great, but it is. I mean, it has to be in a wormhole, so it's got its place,
right?
It's not an all the time ability.
So. But I don't know, and I really liked the shenanigans I've seen with the promissory note, but like that was another thing in the game that we played. I gave out the promissory note and planned to do a lot of shenanigans, and then guess what? Just didn't need to. Yeah, it just never. Right. I was like, whenever.
Yeah, I held your promissory note for most of the game, and then I gave it to somebody else at some point, and it never got called for.
I was like, the smart play is to try and save this for when it makes sense, because I thought if I used it too early, I would be telegraphing where I wanted to go, and it would be more of a threat. And the way the game was playing out for me, I was like, this is not a threaten the table game. This is
and I mean,
win in the shadows.
The resident on our Discord, DS Jensen, who is our resident Ghost expert, that's his major argument. See, I think he always makes is like, the last thing Ghosts need to try to do is to make themselves look like an enemy.
Because they're
a friend of the table. Use your 4 commodities. Like, be everybody's buddy.
I mean, there are a lot of faction versus things I can do in my head where I feel like, what is the Ghost going to do against that faction? Like, I just feel like there's a lot of factions, actually. They're kind of flimsy. I just feel like they're a little flimsy. Yeah. That's why they're there. So I think you already revealed your next one. Yeah. So I'll go ahead and reveal my next one, which would be 12. 12. My 12 is Arborek. Which is funny because I just got done talking about... Yeah, now we're caught up. I just got done talking about how, as a Ghost player, I was able to take advantage of Arborek. I feel like Arborek... It's kind of... Even though we've had a lot of similar stuff, the philosophy we're using, I think, is a little bit different.
Yeah, I really disagree with putting Arborek above Prius.
Right.
Go on.
But I feel like with Arborek... there is more potential to, if you can solve your problems, your potential for a lead is much more solid. Arborek is the, if I figure out how to get this going, I'm going to have some really scary abilities. I mean, I'm thinking about the 16 infantry on Mechatol Rex, which is the magic number, in my opinion. Yeah. And essentially when you're facing that, I don't know. It can just feel like, I don't know what to do now against Arborek. I mean, X89 but that's not a real
but
option.
My argument, and not to like, we're not really doing this to argue with each other's picks, but the only thing I would push back on is for Arbrecht to actually get those 16 there can be quite difficult because it's very easy to see them going for it. That's what happened in our game was we saw Arbrecht, waltzing towards Mechatol, and everybody's like, well, we all have to get there first.
Right.
And it's just really easy to block them early. Because their early game is bad, you can usually put a stop to all their hopes and ambitions.
I think they are finicky, and I think we just need. I think with Arborek and with Exja and with Sardak, there just needs to be some rewriting to the general way that people approach it.
Yeah.
Because I think there's more potential there than people like. Think about there was a game that we saw. We're not. Actually, we decided we're not going to be able to show this game to you. But the game where you saw where Jimbov was playing Arborek and just opened perfectly, like was just so scary, and literally the only mistake he made was not. He had a very clear opportunity to double down on Mechatol Rex, and he got a little greedy.
Yeah.
But had he not done that, I mean, like, it was one of the craziest games I've ever watched as far as, like, this person is clearly in the lead, and I do not know how this is going to be undone. Right. And it's a little telling that even in my example, Arborek does not win. Right. But I guess what I'm saying is I see a lot of really scary potential in their ability, and it's potential that I feel like hasn't just been, like, completely figured out yet.
Yeah.
But I think I am playing a little more personal than you are with this. Of all the factions we've talked about, Arborek is my favorite thus far. Right. So that's why they're there. I think that's about the highest I could give them reasonably.
Yeah.
Basically.
Well, and I'll say this much too. Something that I think defines this kind of C tier thing is so far all the factions that we're discussing are ones that, like you say, if the right thing goes right, they can run away. I mean, they can do very, very well. You rarely see a Muwat or a Sardak do very, very well.
Right.
Like even in the game we had with the Great Yin Brotherhood, where the Sardak won. The Sardak won, and it was a good victory, but it's not like Sardak ran away with it.
Right.
They weren't 4 points ahead of everybody else. But in the right game, Krius or Arborek or whatever, they can run away with it if given the right circumstances.
Yeah, I totally agree. All right, do we want to talk? What's your next one?
My next one,
your 11.
My 11, my number 2 in the C tier is the Mentak Coalition.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is a surprise to me.
Really? Because I like the Mentak?
Because you like the Mentak.
I like Mentak, but I accept their faults.
Okay.
Which is, again, going with my theme, the meta's against you from the get-go.
Mm-hmm.
Your ability alone means people just hate you and don't want to work with you. That makes it hard to win games. Now, I put them above some of these other factions because I think Ambush is just a killer ability. It's so good to get 2 shots of 6 before combat. Or
it's insane.
Like
it's literally enough to make cruisers viable, which is kind of wild.
Their cruisers are just so good, and I think you do more with that to offset. So there's some people in the community. I know Blarknob is one of them who just thinks Mentak is absolute trash.
Yeah,
because of how bad they do in their meta. Their meta doesn't let up on a Mentak.
Right.
And my argument is just that, well, the Mentak have to accept that the meta is going to work against them and use ambush and be dirty.
Right.
But being dirty is hard and not always easy to win games. So they do have to be lower tier because it's very hard to win with them.
That's funny. That's really funny. Okay, well, so my number was number 12.
This is number 11.
Number 11. My number 11 is Barony of Letnev, which is pretty low. Pretty low for Barony.
Wow.
Yeah.
We're both coming out weird in the C
tier. Weird in the C tier. Barony, I feel, has some very solid abilities. That home system is ridiculous. But I just don't feel like they have the right type of abilities. I think their abilities are too specialized in that they get these like really awesome fleets that are super good. And I've been seeing more often than not now people getting all of the right tech with Barony, and it just not amounting to enough in the end.
Right.
It just comes down to that classic, like, if you can't win space battles, then, or if all you can do is win space battles, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have the game.
Right.
And too often, I see baronies run into capacity problems, not building enough ground forces. And also, like, their ground forces aren't great. Like, they get a lot of bombardment, but they don't have, like, besides their flagship, they don't have a good workaround for things like PDS.
Right.
In fact, their flagship is basically the only workaround. And, like, that's basically it.
Yeah.
And it's a good flagship, but I don't know. I also feel like it might be a little personal. I feel like I hate factions that have, like, tech paths that annoy me. And while Barony of Letnev is, like, especially good at, like, science, like, I think if you were to play Scientists of Letnev every time, as we described in the first round strategy guide, I would maybe be more stoked on them. But I don't see people play that style a lot. And when they don't, I feel like it just doesn't go that well. Weird tech path, blue and a red. It's weird.
I think we're in the part of the pack where it's just really hard to make calls. Like these middle factions, it's just really hard to say exactly how they're gonna do because it just varies so wildly.
I'll say this. I think Barony is the exact spot where the only reason that they're in the spot that they're in is not because I think they're bad in any way, but because I just think that every single faction above them is better.
Right. I think that's kind of a better way to word what I was trying to get at. Is like we're at the situation where it's just like when you put them up against other things, they look a little bit worse.
Yeah. I feel like too often than not, I see their abilities just not amount to a lot.
Falls flat.
It's just good, but not necessarily winning the game.
Well, it's the Sardak +1 to combat problem. It's the the combat isn't what wins you the game. You got to do other stuff, and Barony doesn't always pull that out of the bag right. What rounds out your C tier? What's your number 1 in C tier?
Oh, you don't want to reveal your next one?
Mentak was my number 2.
Oh, right. So my number 1 in the C tier is Necrovirus, which is probably also very personal. Yeah. But that's where I put them. And it's because they swing around the most. Their flagship, I think, obviously I've talked so many times about how much I think the flagship is really, really, really amazing. Yeah. And I love the flagship. There's no telling what's really going to... I almost put them in the middle as the B tier faction.
I think, I was close to as well, but we'll get there.
But yeah, here's something I've noticed a lot that I do, that I've done several times now, is I like using racial faction tech in a way that even that faction doesn't use it. Like chaos mapping is the one I think of a lot.
Yeah.
I really like having chaos mapping as Necro because it just allows you to build a little bit at a time and keep your fleets really fresh
You just
and
never
stocked.
need to do another build.
But you can't even do the other part of it. You can't even do... If you don't have floating factories, you can't hide in... you can't hide it in like an asteroid field.
Do anything effective.
Right. So in that way, it's kind of whatever. But having little combinations like that, I feel like Necro has the most uncertainty to how well they might perform based on all of that. Like I've seen Necros get shut out plenty of times, but not a crazy amount because they still have the certainty of how good that flagship is.
Right.
Which is to say very good.
And command counter economy.
Yeah, and their command counter economy is very easy to maintain.
Yeah.
I could not justify putting them in the A tier. That's why they're in the C tier.
Yeah. So mine, and you're going to hate this, my number 1 on the C tier is the Emirates of Hakan.
Wow.
Yeah. And so to make sure I'm staying on theme here, it's because I have come around to the idea more so that in TI4, the Hakan have to work the meta more than the meta has to work for them.
I agree.
Like that the meta doesn't just like adjust to Hakan and everyone needs to change things up. We tried that. We used to play for that, and that's how I used to feel about Hakan. Is they change the meta and you got to play against them. But that doesn't happen anymore. I just never see that happen. Like they get the deals they get, and everything happens pretty normal. And even more so, they have difficulty getting anything for their money. Like it's just hard to actually make all this stuff work in a way that makes sense. So they spend too much time trying to get the table to just kind of cooperate with them and be like, no, come on, please let me be your trade master.
Right.
Compared, and maybe I'm comparing too much to TI3 because in TI3 it was just like
they're great.
They're the trade czars. They are the trade gods.
But it's not guaranteed anymore, and they have to continue to work.
It's so much not guaranteed that like they have to push so hard to make it work for them that it makes it a difficult faction to play.
That's interesting. I feel like I I agree with your sentiment, but I think you're being very bold about the amount.
I think I
so
am.
like I downgraded Hakan further than I would have.
I can't think of the
before.
last time we saw a Hakan do very well.
I agree with that.
It's been a long time since I've seen a Hakan do really well.
I think there's a chance that in 2018 Hakan had a really rough time in general, because they started as, I think for a lot of people, us included, like a number 2 or number 3 faction, period.
Yeah, I was the first half of this year, I was prepared to just like always dunk on them as soon as they were in a game. It's just like, no one let Hakan get away with anything. And it swung so hard that Hakan turned into a not great faction to me.
Yeah, that's funny. I think that's probably the biggest. Well, it might not be the biggest disparity, because like I'm looking at where Hakan is on mine, and it's not
far.
It's not far, but there is a difference. There's a difference in our way of thinking. I think. Well, I'll get to it whenever we get to my.
Let's get to everyone's favorite tier.
Right,
the B tier,
the complete middle of.
Who is the middle of the pack?
See, this is interesting because this is where I put Mentak. I put Mentak right here in the middle.
This is where I put Barony.
Wow. Oh, and I get the logic of it. But so the reason I put Mentak here is I think I agree with a lot of the points you made whenever you put Mentak where you put it.
Yeah.
Except for the fact that it's that faction tech that I cannot get past. Mirror computing is so good that I think it single-handedly makes the faction viable. Basically, it just is the thing and ambush is great too. Like, don't get me wrong. It's not that I disagree with your point on ambush. I stand by what I said, which was that ambush is the thing that makes cruisers viable. Right. But mirror computing is such a force to be reckoned with. I have seen so many Mentak players basically get mirror computing about in the mid game and just slowly accrue.
Right. Well, mirror computing is the argument against pillage being bad, right? So the argument against pillage is like, well, people will trade less. You won't actually get as many trade goods as you want. You'll definitely never trade yourself, or it'll be very hard to trade yourself. And it's just hard to use. So you don't end up getting that many trade goods. But when those trade goods are worth double,
right?
Who cares? Like 3 trade goods around is still 6 trade goods. Like it just doesn't matter.
There are so many situations where you get to pillage no matter what. Because think about any time players are automatically awarded trade goods for some reason. Right. There are agendas that do that. Right. There's a lot of situations where Mentak can stand to make a lot of money. And so I actually, in some ways, feel like I'm getting to a point where, and obviously it hasn't happened yet, where Mentak is kind of overtaking Hakan in my book, which is that I
almost did that on mine. I had a moment where they were swapped, and then I decided I couldn't let that happen.
Yeah.
But it's close.
But so the thing about Mentak is that Mentak does start to feel like something everybody is having to play around and think about because of mirror computing. Now, if Mentak does not have mirror computing or they don't research it, then then it's whatever.
Yeah.
I don't care. But if they have Mentak, and that's also a point against a faction having a faction tech that they must research in order to be good. That's not great. That's not something to be celebrated because it makes their tech path a little bit tricky.
Limiting, yeah.
But they have ambush. Cruisers are more viable. And therefore, I think in there are a lot of games where I just feel like I've seen Mentak do really well. I get why people say that they're not that great. I think the reason I put them here is I actually think they're the most controversial faction that like people feel all over the place about. And I think it's something I've seen more in other people than I've even seen it myself. Because when I've played Mentak, it's actually most of the time been a disaster because I mess it up.
Right. So to talk about my Barony in the middle, I just think Barony is like the quintessential vanilla-ish TI race. It's TI where you can succeed really well, but you can also fall into all the pitfalls of TI.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing to sway you either way.
Yeah.
And so to go with my meta argument, there is nothing in Barony's wheelhouse that makes everyone at the table have to play different to do something about it.
For sure.
Because at the end of the day, with Barony's abilities, if they all get online, there's nothing you can do.
Right.
There's no stopping how intense their like capital ships can get.
But just by virtue of the fact that they got all of that tech, they might not be like, it's almost an indication that if you got NES and Duranium, that you maybe didn't do your tech game right, and if tech objectives came out, you may have messed up.
Right. Or you just spent too much money trying to rush on the tech. There's like a lot of reasons it can bite you. And so that's like the same thing of like, you don't need to do anything different, and people don't need to do anything different against you. You just need to play TI.
Right.
And that maybe that's why we don't see them win that often, is because we're not seeing players just like stick to what works and try to score the objectives. But I think if a Barony player does that and doesn't get distracted too much, that's like a good recipe for success. But not enough so to where it's like everybody has to deal with that. It's just like they just need to play the game, and they will do relatively well.
I really like your logic. And I think Barony is something that we have thought a lot. Obviously, Barony is the episode where we went ham on writing it, because it was like basically quadruple the size of any other first round strategy guide. And yeah, I think I like the logic that you're using. I think I went with, in my eyes, Mentak is like the punk rock of Twilight Imperium, where it's like people don't, it's just wild and everybody feels differently about it. Barony is like country music, well, it depends on where you're sitting. But Barony is just, the probably the better middle of the road pick. But I'm the spicy one.
Let's hear that A tier. We're getting into good stuff. This is where my tier list starts to turn into like, we have to deal with this faction. And actually, it's funny because if you had asked me in March of 2018, I would have said Hakan is my last pick in A tier, because the meta needs to deal with them.
Right.
And you put Necro as your top of C tier. I put Necro as my bottom of A tier.
Right.
Because I think they have enough things going well for them. I don't think that the way they have to get tech is any sort of inhibitor. I don't think that's a problem. And I think that the command counter game and all the things that they can do and their flagship make it to where it's like, you have to deal with Necro.
Right.
Not a lot, there are 7 factions that you have to deal with more than Necro.
More than Necro.
But Necro is a faction where when they're in the game, everyone goes, well, we got to reconsider how we feel about the dynamics of the meta.
That is exactly how I feel about the faction that I picked for that slot, which is Yin.
Interesting.
The 8th spot, the bottom of A tier, I put Yin, because I feel like they are a faction that you do have to deal with now, but I do not feel like they are insurmountable. Right. I think that their advantage is a little bit rickety.
Yes.
I think they're a good faction that's not super difficult to play against 1v1.
Right.
Because if you start looking, there's a lot of things that are telegraphed, like their indoctrination ability, which is the cornerstone of their entire strategy. Yep. Let's count planets. Like, let's see how much influence they've got. Oftentimes too, like, it can kind of go different ways, because if Yin gets a good stock of trade goods, I consider that very, very bad. Like, I hate when Yin has any trade goods whatsoever. I prefer people not to trade with Yin.
That's pretty easy to stop. I rarely am able. In defense of your placement for them, Yin has very few meta advantages.
Right.
Like they don't have any tools that let them get the better of the meta.
Right. It's like, I kind of consider them to be a similar faction to like Arborek or the logic we use for Extra, which is that they have this one thing that they do really good and it doesn't always work.
Right.
However, Yin's thing that their hammer,
it works the best out of all of those.
Yeah. Out of all, if you were gonna pick a faction that's good at one thing, I would be like, oh, well, then I'd want to be good at invasion combat.
Right.
And so they do have this one hammer that makes everything look like a nail.
It makes them the most defensive faction in the parts that matter.
Right.
Yes, Extra has all these defensive tools for shooting PDS and stuff, but you just don't take Yin planets hardly ever.
Right.
And that's where it counts.
Right. But I do feel like every other faction I'm looking at, their ability, all the factions above Yin, their ability is not so easily drained out of them. Whereas like Yin, it's a very finite resource they're using that to influence. If they're using it a bunch, it's gonna go away, basically.
Yeah. Cool. What's your number 7?
My number 7 is the L1Z1X.
Yay, we matched up.
Yeah,
we did it.
The first one that's the same.
This is the very first
this is
one
the very first one that is
the
the exact same.
It's 10 factions.
They've been all really kind of in
close,
the same
but
range.
not the exact same. So
God,
yeah,
the L1's just got 7 written all over it.
They sure do.
I felt like where I put my Barony, like at one point I was like, I'll just put L1 and Barony like right next to each other. But I'm such an L1 guy versus a Barony guy. And it just comes down to
L1 is better.
L1 is
when
better.
It comes down to it.
L1 is better.
Hero is better. Assimilate is better. Their Dreadnought is better.
Yeah, that is the number
The
one
key.
thing, is that their dreadnought is better with the 2 capacity, and it's just better in the important way, which is like carrying more
Things you
ground
need to
forces.
carry.
Yeah.
Whether it's ground forces or an extra fighter for the extra defense, like
Right.
regardless, it is better.
They have the Achilles heel figured out of the big fleet factions, which is I didn't bring enough. Oh no, I didn't bring enough stuff. I can't even do the invasion combat. And the fact that I don't know, it's weird. I think Barony and L1 kind of have some weird issues, which is like Barony has like I can get past planetary defense with this one ship, but I would rather just be able to hit over and over.
Exactly.
You know, like I would rather just have every dreadnought be better at bombardment so I can just get stuff all over.
Yeah.
Right. It's like Barony's better at the targeted strike, the one place you need to bust, but rarely that's not going to win you the game.
No.
Most of it is just about if there's a control objective out, I can get over here and get this, because you can't put PDS on every planet. That's not a thing. Right. So like,
for me, so trying to stick with my logic, Necro, like you have to deal with them, but they're also really volatile, so they can be stopped. Lizzix is more like there's nothing that's making the meta just work for them way better. They just are a super solid faction that you can't count them out ever.
Right.
You always have to consider L1Z1X. But I would say they're the one that I have the least of that argument for, of like, ooh, everyone's got to deal with Lizzix. It's more like so often you are too busy thinking about every other faction. There's a soul in the game. There's something else in whatever. These other factions in the game, so you deal with them, and then Lizzix wins.
Right.
Because Lizzix is the next most powerful faction.
Yep. Yeah, and I love playing them. They're so much fun. And it's weird. Like, I feel like we've done so much waffling on L1 because before the game came out, we thought they were just like the best. Right. I do feel like this is where they belong, right here, just kind of in the lower rung of good. Because they're assimilate when it happens, when it does happen, it is so devastating. Yeah. It is like really
losing your home system to a Lizzix is about the worst thing that can happen to you in any game.
Yeah. And having that ability in their pocket is just really, it's really odd. I mean, basically PDS is the thing that L1 hates the most, but if they do win, they get past it, then it's really crazy. Yeah. And with inheritance systems being like their kind of catch-all, like I've seen so many times where L1 succeeded in stealing like 2 PDS, and then the next round got Space Cannon, and then all of a sudden they're like a Dreadnought faction with really good PDS. Yeah. Like I have seen L1 kind of like double its abilities mid-game so many times now. Yeah. And then there's always the late game L1 Warsun play, which is always there, always as a potential.
Right.
Yeah.
My number 6, or my number 2 in the A tier, and I think this is my most wrong pick, and is my most personal one, is Yin.
Yeah.
Yin is my 6 because I do agree that like you have to think about them from a meta perspective of like when they take a planet, you got to be prepared for that to be a problem. But they're flimsy. You can do things against them. You can stop a Yin. Plenty of games of Yin fall apart. But when they have the right tools, you have to worry about them. And especially if they get that stranglehold on Mechatol Rex, you're in trouble. Like, you're in a lot of trouble if they get a good stranglehold on Mechatol Rex.
Yeah. My number 6 is, and I don't think this is personal, I do think this is where this faction belongs, is Hakan.
Yeah.
My number 6 is Hakan. And I feel like what's happening is that we have seen too many people squander the ability of Hakan, and that experienced players have already played a lot of it, and they kind of get passed up for other more exciting or sexy factions. But I do feel like they are still a very competitive faction because they kind of have a unique ability of being able to turn their game around really quickly with all of those trade goods. Yeah. I can't tell you how many times with Hakan I ran into an issue that I was able to solve with all of my trade goods. Yeah. It just feels like they do. So like if, let's say it's a command counter issue, all of a sudden, like I just can't think of a faction that I more often just use those 6 trade goods plus trade to equal the objective. And sometimes
Right.
that can even be a 2-pointer.
Right.
So that potential is really hard. I think it's also just like kind of hard to account for that. With them also being like very well positioned for Dreadnought 2, they kind of just always have basically average combat abilities,
Right.
just kind of in the running, but not great. And then it's so easy for them to catch up from a deficit. But I do feel like they run into more deficits than before. I do think they deserved to be downgraded from where they were in everyone's collective hearts.
Yeah.
But I feel like where you put them is too low.
Sure.
And maybe mine is too high. Maybe they're somewhere in the middle.
They're
I don't
the
know.
most middle faction.
Yeah.
I'll say this much in defense too of trying to put them higher. I think another thing that's happened with us specifically and the groups we play with, we've done a lot more drafting or streams where people pick the factions for us. We just see Hakan less.
Right.
Hakan doesn't get included in drafts because, as a general rule, a group of people are like, oh god, we do not want to have to deal with a Hakan. And then for streams, people have seen Hakan plenty because they're a popular faction, so we never get given Hakan for streams. So I don't even think I've seen the Hakan in a while.
Yeah.
I mean, it was probably a TTS game where you were Hakan.
Yeah,
the last
probably
time.
since we were writing the episode for them.
something.
Yeah.
But regardless, it's like you just don't see it very often, and so I think that's the other reason I'm just thinking of them worse
Also,
than they really are.
I think they are a faction that I think we need more time with them, basically, because their advantage became so wobbly and different. I remember when we were doing the episode for them, and there were so many people that sent in like, "This is how we do it. It's great." Like, well, I'll like write out a thing, and everyone signs a contract in blood, and like just different. Like people just have a lot of different ways of thinking about them for a faction that is like, like people don't. When we talk about Jolnar, people don't send in like, "Well, here's my crazy." No, we know,
There's
we
the
know
way
what
to
it
win
is.
Jolnar.
Yeah,
There's the way. Hakan has so many outs that it could be done very creatively.
Yeah, I think for Hakan, I think we're both wrong. I think they're somewhere in between where we both put them. I think I have a little bit of a soft spot for them. I think you never really cared for them, so like you're fine just like putting them really low. And also you just wanted to you gotta have the dramatic moment of the thing, and we've kind of passed that potential now. I want to hear your number 5.
Final A tier is Clan of Sar.
Oh, wow. I thought they were going to make it all the way up there to that final
not
tier
for me
you.
because I still think that they have their weaknesses. I do think Asar has to be dealt with, and the scariest thing about Asar is they have to be dealt with right away.
Yeah.
Because those first 2 rounds of Asar are where they do the most damage and get a lot of leg room.
Yeah.
Especially, like, since we wrote the guide, too. When we wrote the guide, it was like, they just get to go for objectives and then flail and then die.
Mm-hmm.
But that seems to be less true these days, where like actually a SAR can survive pretty well
for
most
sure
of the game if they do the right setup and if you are smart about it. But even so, that makes them a faction that everybody has to deal with. But all that being considered, they're still the one that get eliminated the most, or like everyone just successfully decides to crush. When the whole group decides to band against SAR for 1 round, SAR does not come back from that.
I think I sort of disagree because I think that SAR as for all the really, really good factions, I think SAR requires the deft hand. You really need to know what you're doing playing a SAR game versus some of these other factions we're about to talk about. And I feel like there are some pitfalls, but I feel like when I see someone that's really good play SAR, it's really frightening to the point where it's like a lot of it comes down to the like ghost bomber trick, the like space dog.
The weird tricks you can pull off of SAR are what make them ridiculous, and it's like annoying. It is truly annoying to play against. The reason I put them top of A tier and not into S tier is because the 4 factions in S tier, the way you have to deal with them is so much bigger than just like SAR's going to get huge and they're going to be terrifying.
All right, well, let me talk about my top of A tier.
Actually, I have one more point on SAR.
Throw one more thing.
The last problem with SAR is, yes, you have a huge fleet, but that doesn't mean you have a lot of planets that help you get stuff. You maybe get a bunch of planets really fast, but then you start losing those planets. People start coming through and cleaning up the slug trail, and so even a great SAR a lot of times ends up with only like 4 planets per round.
Right,
and that's not enough
tough
for
lots
of objectives. There's lots of objectives that becomes a problem for. So that's like my big argument against them is if people play against them correctly, it hurts them. My other 4 factions, even if you play against them correctly, it's still hard.
Okay.
So that's like the defining factor of what pushes SAR into A tier.
I think I agree with that. I just think that their potential to do well is really high, and perhaps higher than maybe two of the other factions that we.
So what's the top of your A tier?
So my number 5 for A tier is Isarl.
I knew it was going to be that because I know we have the same top 3.
Yeah. So yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, that not everything has changed. Isarl, I think we lowballed them really early.
Sure.
And I think they either belong in the spot that I'm talking about or the spot where I think you probably put them. And I don't even know what to say at this point. They're great. They're great for all the reasons that they were great before. We got really excited about the idea that they maybe had been nerfed, and I think they did just a tiny bit though, just half.
I wouldn't call it a tiny bit because they were ridiculous in TI3.
Yeah,
but they were nerfed into being a great faction.
Really great faction.
It doesn't. They didn't. Yeah,
it was hard for us to know because we didn't know the action card deck super well. Now we know it really well, and so we know all of the tricks that they're going to be able to get up to. I think also the potential of the relationship between Isarl and Hakan never ceases to be fascinating.
Yeah.
And if there's an Isarl that can get the better end of that deal with Hakan, wow, there's almost no limit to what you're going to do then at that point. They're insane.
I want to jump ahead because I do want to talk about Isarl. Isarl is the bottom of my S tier, 4th place, and I put them ahead of SAR because I think Isarl. Their win is a little bit more automatic. And I think this is a meta thing. I think this is something that could change because I really want to see people put more pressure on Isarl because I'm sick of seeing Isarl win or have a game round where we're like, oh crap, we all let Isarl sit and stall for the first 4 turns, and now we're going to watch Isarl win or come very, very close to winning and then win next round or whatever. Like that happens too often, and I think people need to start putting the kibosh on that and like getting in Isarl's way, because it's not like that happen. Like the reason the crazy Isarl swing happens is because people let it happen.
Right.
It's not like it's impossible to stop it, but it does require knowing all the action cards you could be up against and knowing how to deal with it ahead of time. So for me, they're in S tier because you have to play against them to get the better of them. If you leave an Isarl alone, they'll have a ridiculous action card hand and they will win in 1 round.
Right. Yeah,
I think the problem is they don't look threatening most of the game because they can do a 6-point swing.
Right.
It's just so easy for them to accomplish that.
They're really great.
They're not
late
threatening
game
until they just won the game.
Right.
Whoops, you forgot about Isarl.
Right. Yeah, and they don't. Their early game is fine.
It's good, but it's not threatening.
Right.
So you forget that they're a hugely threatening race.
Right, and then they just have the 10 action card hand, and they've pruned it.
And you can't sabotage them because they have the tech that they need.
Right.
And you just
you
run into all those problems.
That part is very rough. I do feel like my 4th place is SAR, and I think it's just because of that higher end potential. I just feel like a SAR, if they're playing right, if they're playing good, it doesn't matter because they had such a great early game that even though Isarl is going to be able to, and this, I don't know if a 1v1 matchup is the way to think about this. It's just that if I had to pick between having a really great early game and a really great late game, if we're playing 10 points, I might say early game. Like I might say that I would rather have a really, really good early game. And I think as long as SAR doesn't make those critical mistakes in the middle, doubling down on Mechatol. I think that was something early on we saw lots of SARs do, and the more often I see them not do it, the more often it's like, well, that was great. They just because you don't need to take the SAR ball to Mechatol. You just need to take it. You just need to steal that point and then continue messing stuff up. Every time I see a SAR be like, well, instead of just like focusing on Mechatol, I'm going to put pressure on this particular neighbor of mine. They win. Like, I think any SAR that's basically like, well, I want to have the double-sized pie slice. You're in trouble. You're out. About half of the factions on this list would not be able to stand up to that.
Yeah.
So I think whereas Isarl is a more automatically great faction, SAR is a more specifically great faction. Yeah. Whereas if you're playing them right, I'm not really sure what you do to that. I mean, what factions are going to be able to stand up early game to a SAR ball knocking on the door? There's a point in every single game where I play with SAR where they are the most powerful faction on the table without a doubt with a fleet that can beat any fleet every single time.
Right.
And I feel like a lot of the times, like I would say about half the time, I feel like the player that has that power does not wield it correctly. So that's what I'm saying. That's the difference I feel like in our approach here is I'm just saying that the potential is a lot scarier to me.
Yeah.
When in actuality,
I think I 100% agree with you, and it just the way I think about how I want to place them based off of that thought is different.
Yeah.
Because I agree completely with what you're saying, but because they have the higher potential, but like the lower bottom floor is what makes me put them top of A tier, and a Sorrel being steady. But I think Sorrel wins more often.
I think so. I think that's probably true.
So I put them bottom last.
Yeah.
What's your number 3? I can't decide if I think that we're going to have all the same, or if these top 3 are all going to be totally jumbled.
My number 3 is Nalu. That's
Not
your
mine,
number. No. Okay.
So let's hear it.
So obviously the ability to look out for is the 0.
Yeah.
And that comes into play so many times late game. It's so huge. It's such a huge ability. I just feel like sometimes I've seen people go for the right tech, but it not really translate into a victory. I'm thinking, of course, of... Well, actually, what am I thinking of? The fleet one. The gum up the Neuroglaive. I feel like Neuroglaive is really cool, except for it's just strictly a defensive ability that doesn't necessarily win you the game. And also, I feel like fighters are good, but not
It's that
the
space
best.
combat problem that you talk about.
Yeah.
You can win a space combat with a bunch of fighters, sure. Then what?
Right. So they're almost like, I would say they are the S tier version of something like Xcha, where it's like, we have a lot of awesome ways to avoid fighting or discourage people from fighting us, which is good. And Nalu does it right. This is not, they're my third. So I do not think they are bad by any means. But sometimes it feels like those abilities are cool, but not going to quite make this particular game they're in work. Yeah. Whereas the other two, the two that I put above it, it's like, I feel like the net for, this is the right objectives for them is wider. I just feel like with Nalu's is a little bit narrower. The thing that they have that always goes for them is the initiative, which is huge. Like that is kind of the swing thing that would have swung them up to 2 or even 1. But yeah, I think I'm just going with my gut as far as the amount of games played. Right. What do you think?
For me, Nalu, I think having that 0 initiative just works more often than it doesn't. Like that's, again, if you're playing an even game with somebody else, Nalu wins.
Yeah.
Every time.
Of course.
So all Nalu has to do is stay competitive.
Right. But their combat abilities compared to the other two are definitely third in combat. Would you not say that? Compared to the other two. In just raw fighting.
I don't know. I mean, I would put them above Jolnar typically in combat. I would actually say, yeah. I mean, generally speaking, I think that they're going to win more combat. I don't know. It's really hard, and I think so. My number 3 is Soul,
right?
Because, and I think this is where I get very distinctly 2018 about this, which is Soul has started to come around because people aren't letting Soul get away with being Soul,
right?
So we've seen lots of games where the Soul just gets crushed because no one is willing to let them take Mechatol, no one is willing to let them take Abyss Freya, no one is willing to let them take Aaron Mir. Like, people push really hard. The meta has pushed really hard against Soul, and even though Soul is really good, and that's why they're in the top, is because the meta has to push against them. I think it's not that hard to do nowadays. Because as long as you don't let them get early game ground, it's really hard. Like, Orbital Drop only lets them drop things on things they already have.
Right. So they have to get it.
And they have to be able to carry those carriers. So if you can kill their carriers and keep them kind of contained, Soul doesn't actually run away anywhere else. They don't do anything else the whole game.
Here's my argument. I have an argument against that, though.
Go ahead.
See, the problem with that way of thinking, and that would be I think that would be totally right. Except for that, I feel like people actually don't succeed in pulling that off because they have the best starting tech outside of Jolnar. Yeah. Their tech path is impeccably great.
It is.
And so the idea has always been from the beginning that you're going to get there before the other person. So it doesn't really matter. You get there, your dudes move in, they gentrify the neighborhood is yours. Like that has always, I feel like, been
Sure.
the Soul stance. So I feel like what you're saying, it kind of works for people sometimes, and I have seen that work. But they still just get there before the other person. That's the problem.
I think in practice, my thoughts are that has only been half true. Like, they can just get there first, but I think so often we just don't see them actually
get there before. Well, I mean, I think that comes down to a mistake of the player then.
Mistake of the player, or sometimes shape of the galaxy. Sometimes it's like the pathway for Soul to do stuff just isn't right. So especially this is what we saw in the Gen Con tournament. In a competitive build, everyone
That's
just screws Soul over because that's what they need. They need a bridge. They need a planet bridge to get them where they're trying to go.
Yeah.
And if they don't have that planet bridge, they kind of lose. That's like the what I see the most like trepidation from a Soul player is when, like, well, I could keep going in this direction, but I'm going to have to park this carrier in empty space first for like a round.
And that's a death knell right
and
there.
That sucks.
Yeah,
that sucks to do. So sometimes people just choose not to do it, and it completely reroutes their entire strategy.
Right.
They don't go for what would have gotten them there first, and they would have won. So that it's a big... That defines a lot of Soul games.
I think that's really...
planet makeup.
I think that's a really good point, and I think has maybe shaped my opinion on Soul, is the fact that we do cooperative build.
Yeah, so
in
we
a competitive
make a slice
build,
that's going to be okay for Soul.
Right, because... I mean, a slice that's okay for any faction is going to be okay for Soul, too.
Every slice in our prelim round map is great for Soul.
Yeah, every single one of them.
You got a direct line to Mechatol Rex, and you have it's beautiful.
Because not having a direct line to Mechatol Rex is a huge bummer, and like is never good for any faction. That's always pretty much bad.
In a competitive build, you should put two things in between Soul and Mechatol Rex, and now Soul's game is gone.
Right. But that's still, I mean, what you're saying is that you have to completely orient.
I agree, which is why they're number 3. I mean, they're in the top because you do have to play against them.
And they're my number 2. So.
Nalu is my number 2. So we have the same number 1.
Right.
We'll get there. But Nalu as number 2 for me is just more about the fact that when it comes down to actually winning the game, you need to play against Nalu, and most of the time it's too late.
Right.
It's like, oh crap, they have the 0. They're going to pick Imperial and just win.
That's true.
That's like the biggest power to me that Nalu has. It's not that they score first. It's that they can take Imperial and then use it immediately and win before anyone can touch anything that they have.
You know,
you realize that Nalu is going to win, and they win.
I agree.
Done.
I agree. Yeah, what I'm realizing my entire point of view hinges on of this 2-3 is that Nalu starts green-yellow, Soul starts green-blue.
I think green-yellow is great, though. Starting with Starween and Nerul, the debate is over. We don't need to argue about which one is better. Nalu's got both.
Tech path-wise, it is not preferable to starting green-blue, though.
It's not great because you need to get the blue out of the way to get your fighter 2, but then you just keep going down green.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think it's so far out of the way that it's that bad. But you're right. They're just tighter. Soul's is obviously tighter.
That's what I'm saying, though, is that I'm saying it's a really close race, obviously, super close,
right.
And that for me, it all just hinges on green-yellow versus green-blue, and that it is that close.
Yeah. That's what you have to make the call on. Is that for me? I have to make the call on what wins the game in the last round.
Always going to be initiative. Always going to be initiative.
So.
Yeah, I think in general, a lot of our logic towards the second half of this has been, I value the early game a little more than you, and you value the late game more than I do.
I value the races that can pull off a little weird swingy bit.
Yep.
Something crazy.
Yeah. I think I
don't play steady.
Yeah.
You play steadier. So
right.
You prefer
I prefer a steady start, a start where you're probably always going to have a great start.
Yeah.
And I feel like because a lot of times that's how I win games, is by having a steady start and carrying through. I don't swing.
Right.
I start steady, go hit that mid game and stay and sustain and then win.
Yeah.
I actually want to play Soul again. This argument
I mean, you
you
played Ghosts as a swing. I mean, you had a huge swing round in that game.
That's true.
But you were forced to because you were Ghosts.
Right.
So.
Yeah, it's not that I can't play outside of my own style, but that's my preference. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about why Jolnar is the 100% best
Still
faction.
the best.
Still the best. And there's a lot of reasons for it that have become even more apparent, honestly. Because there was a period in time where we were trying to harp on Soul's the new best.
Right.
And I've come back around.
Yeah.
So let's walk through all of the reasons why Jolnar is the best.
What's the key word? What's like the number one word with the bullet?
Research agreement.
Yeah, well, I want to be even more. I want to paint with a wider brush. Oh, it's been so long.
Paint for me.
Versatility has always been the key word.
They can just do whatever.
That's been the key word for what makes a good TI faction in general. Forever. And Jolnar, it just won't go away. It's almost boring how good they are.
Yeah, that's what I want to
say.
Here's what's sad about it. I genuinely feel in my loins that Jolnar is my favorite faction.
Right.
Because I'm not limit, especially in TI4. Because TI4, the tech path problem, and that's how I see it. I think it's annoying that, like, we need to get specific tech so that we can get the tech of our faction.
Right.
That drives me crazy.
Right.
And with Jolnar, you don't have to consider it. You just get whatever you want. So every game of Jolnar, I can play a completely different game. Last time I played Jolnar, I went straight into blue. I did not get any of the, like, ERES siphons or PDS, any of that stuff, until like round 4 or 5. Mm-hmm. I went all speed. I got Dreadnought 2 right away, and I was very mobile. I was an incredibly mobile Jolnar, and it was really, really fun.
Mm-hmm.
Next game I play, I'm gonna do something completely different. I want to go War Suns first with that. You can do everything with Jolnar, and that's what makes them the most fun faction to play, and they do it well. So it sucks that it's cheap or whatever, but it's because it is the most fun. Like, you get to do whatever you want, and that's fun to me.
I almost wish they were even, like, it's funny because they have the biggest detriment, which is the -1.
Yeah. And you know what's great about that, too? For me as a player, that's what screws me. Like, in last year's Holiday Spectacular, that's what completely screwed me over, was really bad ground combat.
It does finally work
Jolnar
out.
feels like the perfect faction for me, because it's like, I get to do whatever I want, but I have one really dire Achilles heel.
Yeah,
it is gonna just ruin me if I don't.
It's rough.
Fix that.
It's very rough. It just never ceases to amaze me there. I mean, like, we haven't even, like, you even just use an example. You're like, I didn't even get ERES siphons. ERES siphons, maybe even more so than mirror computing, is probably the best tech in the game. It's just insane. Like, because that's the whole thing about Jolnar.
And the fact that they can get it right away. Like, their skip allows them to just have it. They basically start with that.
That's the part that drives me crazy. And I actually, sometimes
ERES siphons should have required 4 yellow.
Yeah, it should have just been crazy. Like, so the whole thing, ERES siphons is actually, I think maybe even if there was a problem with
Jolnar. What is ERES siphons for those that maybe
so ERES siphons is every time you activate Jolnar units in general, not even more specific than that, just units, I believe.
Right.
They get 4 trade goods.
Oh, no, it is ships.
Oh, it is
beans. It's okay, though. Still a lot. When you activate their ships.
All right. Well, ships can mean fighters. That can mean everything. Yeah. So every time you activate their ships, they get 4 trade goods. So the problem with this is that the old adage was, well, Jolnar's weak early. Just be mean to them early.
Right.
Well, now they can get ERES siphons right away, which means that actually doesn't fix anything.
They'll outpace you. Like, the only option is to completely kill them right away. Like, eliminate them right away.
Which is insane.
And, which is not an argument. You can't do that. You won't get away with it.
You won't even win by doing that. You will, like, ugh.
It won't be fast enough, because if they see you coming, they'll get ERES siphons, and then they'll use those trade goods to build lots of dreadnoughts and ground forces on their home planet, and you'll never take them out.
Right. Or not even do that. They could just go PDS Jolnar and slow you down and make it really difficult. And then, now you're just giving them money that's going to go into the
Or they just get Lightwave Deflector and go through you to your home system. Like, it's just like 100 options that they can do to deal with that. So that's ERES siphons. Let's talk about Research Agreement.
Yeah.
Not only do they gain 4 trade goods every time someone attacks them, but they have the best bargaining chip in the game.
Yep.
Research Agreement is guaranteed to make you money. And it is the hardest, like, the argument would be, well, don't use it. No, I'm going to use it.
Right.
Every play, it's the same thing as, like, how trading has worked out with Hakan, of like, no, I'm going to take the 6 trade goods. Screw you.
Right.
In this situation, it's like, when Jolnar gets hypermetabolism, you're going to take it. Like, if you have their Research Agreement, you need to take hypermetabolism.
Right.
Or you need to take War Suns, or you need to take all the things that they're going to get.
They're a faction that it's like all of the potential ways to take them down, they have an answer for that.
Exactly.
That's why they're the best.
They're perfectly insane.
So let's be mean to them early. Well, sorry, I got ERES siphons. Okay, well then let's just meta against them. Well, I do have the best bargaining chip in the game that you would be crazy stupid not to take. So like, if a table were to be like, no trading with Jolnar, and they say, well, I have my research agreement. Technically, I feel like strategically, it is smart for one of those players to be like, I want that, and I'm going to take that. That's better odds for them to win in doing that. I feel like 100% of the time,
and
always.
You just brought up trading. They also have 4 commodities.
Yeah.
So in plenty of games, they're going to be the only 4 commodity faction. So they're still the best faction to trade with. Like, you never... If my list is designed based off the idea the meta has to do something about them, the meta has to do something about Jolnar, and they will fail.
Right.
They will fail to do so most of the time.
Also, like, there's the negative one, and it really sucks with infantry. However, not every, like, I would say about half of the factions are lean towards infantry, and half of them don't, which means that if Jolnar upgrades their infantry, then they're competitive with about half of the factions that are available.
Right.
So depending on the factions that have been chosen, it might already basically be over as far as that is concerned.
Right.
Because then, well, now I'm basically tied with everybody. And if it's like, like if you're just not having a lot of infantry heavy factions, what am I thinking of? Like, what are some good examples of that? Like SAR isn't really an infantry faction at all. That, like, you're just going to run into those issues. It almost feels like Jolnar, more than any other faction, has to be specifically played against.
Yeah, you really, really do, and you have the most tools to put up with people trying to play against.
And we
you.
haven't even brought up the fact that but a good percentage of the objectives are tech objectives that are super easy for, and that's thinking about the public objectives, but also don't forget the secret. Yeah. The secret objective, the secret tech objective of having all 4 on one color, is very easy for Jolnar, and I would say super hard for everybody else. Yeah. Every time I draw that one, I'm like, well, dude, this sucks.
Yeah,
I'm not going to get
Sorrel or one of these factions that already goes straight down a color. Getting 4 in one color is a definite.
Oh, yeah, it's awful. It's not. It's literally a wasted secret that Jolnar doesn't only just specifically accomplish, but they do it very easily.
Yeah, they can do it so fast. Because again, as long as tech gets picked, you can always buy 2 tech. So you'll always make your comeback. You'll always get whatever tech you want. You'll never have wasted tech. Our whole tech skip arc was about the fact that there's nothing wasted.
Right.
Jolnar. You do not need tech skips because you have an inherent tech skip and you will just never get a wasted tech.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that Jolnar is such a good faction that they have been kind of criminally underrepresented in the show.
Nobody lets them play in games.
Yeah, but I also mean, like, in our talks, there have been so many episodes where we've had a strategic nugget to talk about, and then we get to the Jolnar part, and we're just like, well, it's whatever.
Amazing.
Like,
yeah.
Like we don't even have anything to add.
We wash our hands of Jolnar most of the time.
Yeah, because like, what are you gonna do? It's a faction that essentially has access to every tech in the game, every single game.
With a Jolnar, you are playing against circumstance. Mm-hmm. You have to wait for them to make one little flaw, and you have to capitalize on that. That's like the only reliable way, and it's not reliable to beat a Jolnar. Is like, oh, there's a crack in their armor. Yeah, time to jump on that right now.
It's almost like, I don't know, like that. People have to play against them, like, in a kind of way that I almost feel like is unethical to play.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean?
Like, well, and that was the same argument in TI3 where people are just like, well, if you just completely kill them, if you just murder their entire family, then you'll be great. It's like,
dude, do we really want to play that?
Do we need to do that game? Yeah, I'm not interested in. And so most of the time, Jolnar gets off easy the first couple rounds,
right?
And then it's too late,
right?
So yeah, in every direction, the meta plays in their favor,
right? Yeah, I'm glad that we both went this, because I was like gonna try and buck tradition a little bit, because I think Jolnar being the best is kind of it's the classic answer. It's like kind of the thing everyone's known.
It's an answer that deserves giving warning to people who haven't heard it enough.
Yeah,
because like you just said, we haven't even talked about Jolnar enough in a long time, and it's like,
well, because
they are a huge threat. They are a huge threat.
There's
if you're a new player, they're a huge threat, and you need to worry about.
Should we do a whole episode on just playing against Jolnar?
Probably, because I think we haven't thought about it enough.
Yeah,
I
that's
think we
a good
need
point.
to play games against Jolnar and start coming up with strategies against Jolnar.
Versus Jolnar. Yeah. That would be a very cool episode.
I want to do that with Jolnar. I want to do that with all of these top 5 factions.
Yeah.
We need.
What a
You
fun...
need tools against Nalu. You need tools against Isarl. You need tools against Sar. You got to think about how you're going to deal with those factors.
Wow, you guys just got 5 episodes right there. Okay, so we're going to do versus Jolnar, versus Sol, versus Nalu, versus Sar, versus Isarl.
Yeah, that's a very
super
least.
Cool. That's really cool.
Let's leave on that note because my throat is about to.
Yeah,
burn
you're
up
almost
and go
out.
straight
You're
to
almost out.
H.
Well, look. So that was our 2018. We called some shots like goofy idiots, and we've really kicked the beehive this time. Y'all sting us, and we're next time you guys see us, we're gonna be covered in boils.
I want to see everybody else's list. If you disagree with us, don't just talk about like the one slot you disagree with. I want to see your whole list because I think knowing where things fall in line with each other is more important than just knowing I would put Arbrek 15th. It's like, well, okay, but what did you put below? What did you put above?
Yeah.
Like, I really am interested in seeing a lot of the community's full tier lists and some rationale as to why. Because like we said, there's a few cases of ours where like I put Necro above the middle part and I put Hakan below it. And that felt really distinct to me. Not just to put Hakan in 9th or 10th place, but like to specifically put them below the middle bar.
Yeah.
So I want to hear everyone's S tier, A tier, single faction B tier. That's important.
You have to do it like we do.
C tier and D tier. 4 factions apiece except for B tier. I am serious about this.
He's
I
serious.
want to see them.
He has
I'll
a very
cancel the podcast if I don't get at least 10.
Yeah. Oh wow, that's
Yeah,
a big
come on.
commitment. 2019. All right, well, that about does it for us. Next time you hear from us, it will be 2019. It's going to be a new year. We've got so many cool things planned for you. I'm sorry we didn't get to reveal more of it because so much of it is in the works.
We got to make sure it'll actually happen.
Yeah, that's a good point. But be assured, there are many really cool things coming up, with the first thing coming up next week. We will have played, the games will have begun, the tournament arc has begun. Goku, you'll be hearing about Goku and how he did. He doesn't do well at the beginning, but then in the end, he's got it. And we will probably have a sort of fictional Goku, or a player that we have designated as Goku.
I'm going to pick a Piccolo.
I'm going to pick a Krillin, somebody who I like and is great and funny, but doesn't
He's
have
not
a shot in
going to
this.
win.
It's not, no hope there. In fact, maybe every single winner of the prelims I will assign a Dragon Ball character to, based on our predictions.
We're going to have to do some Dragon Ball research.
Yeah.
All right.
Tournament arc, it begins now.
Thank you for listening to Space Cat's Peace Turtles, and thanks to Ben Prunty for the use of his music. You can find more at benpruntymusic.com and benprunty.bandcamp.com. Pax Magnifica, Bellum Gloriosum.